In the dimly lit training hall, surrounded by hardened soldiers and the smell of sweat and steel, she stood with trembling legs, her uniform torn and blood seeping through the fabric. To the men around her, she was nothing more than a fragile figure who had reached her limit, a wounded woman caught in a place meant for warriors. They whispered among themselves, questioning why the commander allowed her to be there, why someone so visibly broken was standing in a room full of Navy SEALs. But what they couldn't see was that beneath her pain, beneath every scar that marked her skin, lay a story far greater than their assumptions could reach. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was experience carved deep into her soul. Every breath she took was a reminder of a past she had survived when survival itself seemed impossible. She had once been part of something extraordinary, a mission so classified that even most of the SEALs in the room would never hear of it. Years ago, she had served under a different name, in a different division, carrying out operations that had saved countless lives, but cost her nearly everything: her health, her identity, her peace. Those who fought beside her either perished or vanished into the shadows of secrecy. She carried that weight alone, her memories locked away behind the discipline of silence. When the commander brought her back into their world, he knew what they didn't. He knew that the woman struggling to stand was the same one who had once pulled 3 wounded soldiers out of enemy territory with a bullet in her leg. But she never bragged about it, never tried to prove herself. She let their judgment roll over her like wind against stone. To her, their doubt was familiar. She had heard it before, seen it in the eyes of men who believed she didn't belong. Yet she kept standing, not because she needed to be accepted, but because she had already faced far worse than their disbelief. There was a quiet defiance in her stillness, a power in her restraint that spoke louder than any defense she could give. When the commander finally decided to speak, the truth cut through the room like a blade. He told them who she was, what she had done, and why she bore those scars. In that moment, every whisper died. The same men who had doubted her now looked at her with awe. Their eyes widened with realization, and shame crept into their faces. She had silenced them, not with words, but with truth. The weight of her past, once hidden, now stood taller than any of them. And as she looked around, still wounded, still barely standing, she didn't smile nor seek validation. She simply nodded once, as if to say she never needed their approval. Her past spoke for her, and that was enough. When the commander's voice broke the tension in the room, it carried the weight of authority and truth. Every SEAL turned toward him, their earlier smirks fading into silence as he began to speak. He didn't shout, didn't raise his tone. Instead, his words came slow and deliberate, the kind that pierced deeper because of their calmness. He revealed what none of them had known, that the wounded woman they had pitied, the one they thought too fragile to stand among them, had once been one of the most fearless operatives in the field. The revelation hit like a wave, washing away every assumption they had made about her. The men who had questioned her strength now felt a quiet sting of shame, realizing they had been standing beside someone whose courage had already been proven in blood and fire long before they ever met her.
The commander recounted missions no one dared to discuss openly. Classified operations that had saved lives, turned the tide of battles, and demanded unimaginable sacrifices. Her name had been erased from records to protect her identity, her heroism buried under layers of military secrecy. And yet, the price she paid for that silence was visible in her scars, in the limp she carried, in the exhaustion hidden behind her steady gaze. The respect she received now wasn't handed to her out of pity. It was earned through pain, through the kind of endurance only the truly brave could understand. For the first time, the SEALs saw her not as a wounded woman, but as a living embodiment of everything they claimed to stand for. As the truth sank in, a deep stillness filled the room. No one spoke, no one moved. The realization settled heavily in their chests. Respect was not about rank, gender, or outward strength. It was about resilience, about how much one could give and still find the strength to rise again. They had misjudged her because she appeared broken, but now they understood that her scars were not signs of weakness. They were proof of survival. Her silence was not the silence of fear, but discipline. Her endurance was not desperation, but honor. The commander's revelation transformed the atmosphere entirely. The arrogance that once filled the space dissolved, replaced by something far more powerful: humility. One by one, the SEALs straightened their posture as if acknowledging her presence in a new light. A few lowered their eyes, unable to meet hers, while others looked on with genuine admiration. She didn't need to speak. Her story had already done what words could not. The room that had once doubted her now stood in respect of her quiet strength. The revelation had not only changed how they saw her, it changed how they saw themselves. They were reminded that real strength doesn't shout or demand validation. It stands quietly, survives the impossible, and lets truth command the respect that words never could. She stood in silence, her body trembling from exhaustion, every movement a reminder of pain endured and battles survived. The wound on her side throbbed, but she refused to let it show. Pain was nothing new to her. It was a companion she had learned to live with long ago. What the others didn't understand was that her strength had never come from her body. It came from the part of her soul that refused to surrender, no matter how deep the scars ran. Redemption was not something she sought in words or recognition. It was in every step she took forward, despite the weight of her past, in every breath that proved she was still standing when she had every reason not to be. Her courage was quiet, unpolished, born not from pride but from necessity. As the commander's revelation hung heavy in the air, she didn't look around for approval or acknowledgement. She had stopped needing that years ago. What mattered to her was the truth, that she had lived through things that tested every limit of the human spirit. The men who now stared at her in awe couldn't begin to comprehend the nights she spent fighting for her life in hostile territory, were the moments when she had to choose between her mission and her heart. The commander's words had peeled back the curtain that had hidden her story. But for her, the revelation wasn't about validation. It was about release. For the first time, the burden of her unspoken truth had been lifted, and in that freedom lay a quiet form of redemption. Her courage had always been misunderstood because it didn't roar, it endured. Even as she bled, she stood straighter than before. Her wounds were reminders of what she had overcome, not
what had broken her. The SEALs who once questioned her now saw the reflection of themselves in her struggle, the same drive to fight through pain, to serve something greater than themselves. But for her, redemption wasn't about regaining respect, it was about reclaiming her identity. She had spent years being defined by loss, by the physical and emotional wreckage left behind. Now, she was being seen for what she truly was: a survivor, a soldier, a symbol of what it means to keep going when the world expects you to fall. The silence in the room was no longer filled with doubt, but with reverence. Even wounded and weary, she radiated something none of them could ignore: a quiet, unbreakable strength. Redemption, for her, didn't come from others' acceptance, but from her own resilience.
She had already found peace in knowing that her strength was real, that her purpose still burned inside her, despite everything. As she looked up, her eyes met the commander's, and, without a single word, she conveyed gratitude, not for being defended, but for being seen. In that moment, she wasn't just standing, she was rising, redeemed not by her past, but by the courage that had carried her through it.